In previous lessons, you learned about the classifications of airspace and special use airspace. Well, now we're going to talk about the last type of airspace called other airspace areas. And they're called that because, well, they don't fit into a classification or under special use airspace. The first other airspace area we will discuss is the Local Airport Advisory, LAA. And that's an area within 10 statute miles of an airport with a flight service station on the field, but no operating control tower. They are shown on the chart by listing the flight service station in the airport information, like here in Northway, Alaska. Flight service stations are run by the FAA, and they give pilots weather briefings, among other things. And here, one of the other things that the flight service station does is to provide traffic advisories for inbound and outbound aircraft. You ask for their advisories and announce your position in the pattern just like you would do at any uncontrolled airport. Now, airport advisory areas are rapidly being phased out in the continental United States because of the automation of flight service stations. However, airport advisory areas still exist in Alaska. We'll talk more about flight service stations in the lesson on cross-country flying. Next, let's take a look at the Palm Springs area. Here we have a terminal radar service area, also called a TIRSA. Now, a TIRSA is shown on the chart by this charcoal-looking line. TIRSAs are around some airports that are not quite busy enough to be designated Class C airspace, but too busy to be left as just Class D airspace. The floors and ceilings are marked just as you've seen before with Class B and C airspace. Now here, the TIRSA goes from the surface to 10,000 feet, and here from 2,000 feet up to 10,000 feet. The TIRSA is the area within which Palm Springs Radar Approach Control can give you advisory information. Now, your participation is voluntary, but it's strongly recommended that you talk to the controller because it's a lot safer to know where other aircraft are. So, what kind of service are you going to get in a terminal radar service area? Well, the controller will provide you with advisories, with sequencing to the airport, and with separation between participating VFR aircraft and all IFR aircraft within the terminal radar service area. And it's important to remember that the separation you're going to get is only between participating VFR aircraft and all IFR aircraft. And this is because VFR participation is voluntary within a TIRSA. The equipment requirements and weather minima are based on whatever class of airspace you are in. It could be Class D, E, or G airspace. Now, take a look at this chart and an area that could be very exciting to you. You're flying along in your Skyhawk and you get to this route called VR-289. These are called military training routes. In military training routes, the military can fly at any speed they want, usually far in excess of 250 knots and very, very close to the ground. And wouldn't that scare the daylights out of you when you see them go by? But you can call a flight service station to find out what times they're being used. Here's how they look on the chart. Now, this route is marked VR-289. Notice that there is also an arrow showing the direction of flight. The military training routes have a numbering system that can either have a 3-digit number or a 4-digit number. Now, if it's a 4-digit number, you know that the training activity is going to be 1,500 feet AGL and below. But if it is a 3-digit number, then the training activity could be at any altitude. Think of the number system as a pyramid with a bigger 4-digit number below and the smaller 3-digit number above. That reminds you that the 4-digit numbers are for flights 1,500 feet and below, and the 3-digit numbers are for flights that could be higher. And if it says VR, that tells you that the flight is restricted to visual conditions. But If it is an IR route, like right here, it could be conducted in any kind of weather because they're allowed to fly in instrument conditions also. So if you go back and look at this route on the chart, it says VR289. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you that there could be training flights at any altitude, but only in VFR conditions. All of this is taking place at speeds in excess of 250 knots. They're trucking right along. Now, take a look at this chart. Look at the Pine Creek Wilderness Area. It's a wildlife refuge, and it's marked with lines and dots on the inside. This line with dots is used to designate noise-sensitive areas like wildlife areas, national parks, and Forest Service areas. They have a request that you fly at least 2,000 feet AGL. The intent of the 2,000-foot recommendation is to reduce potential interference with wildlife and complaints of noise disturbances from low-flying aircraft in canyons and valleys. Now, it's not mandatory, it's only a request, but it's a very serious request. In fact, if a park ranger sees you flying lower than that and he can talk to you, he will give you a stern talk about it. Usually the minimum altitude is 2,000 feet. However, you should always check the chart because some areas have different altitudes. Now, the last area we will discuss is the temporary flight restrictions area. And a temporary flight restrictions area is established when something that is dangerous is going on, such as a forest fire or some activity that might create a lot of public attention, like the Super Bowl. These will not show up on any chart, but they are issued by a notice to airmen. And when a temporary flight restriction has been established, you are required to remain clear of that area. Now you know about all sorts of different airspace areas and how to fly through them and when to avoid them, and this could be very helpful when you are flying on a long cross-country someday.